Okay, so we are slowly approaching the end of this example. And so at this point, we already know the following. And we know that under autarky, Canada could not have consumed more than 2 hot dogs, consisting of 2 links and 2 buns. So that cross here is consumption under autarky, and the United States could consume here. So that was under autarky. Then the countries decided that we should specialize, and we identified that Canada will produce 6 buns and no links, and the United States will produce 7 links and 1 bun. So now this allows for a total of 7 hot dogs, but now we need to trade. And how the countries trade may depend on their bargaining power, but what is important to see already at this point, that there is a way for each country to consume more than what they can produce. Because now theoretically we could have 7 hot dogs available. Under autarky it was only 6. So let's just assume that the United States and Canada, they trade after specialization such that each country receives the autarky consumption level of hot dogs. So Canada gets at least 2 and the United States at least 4 hot dogs, plus half of the joint more production of hot dogs. So the joint more production is that under autarky they produce 6, but under specialization we can produce 7 of each. So that means that the United States can consume 4.5 buns, so that's 4.5, and Canada 2.5. So that is obviously then a total of 7. And so after consumption, the United States should get 4.5 of each. Okay. So, but now that means that the consumption level for Canada will be maybe here at 2.5. And for the United States it will be 4.5, which is here. So if we draw that, maybe, so 4.5, that's here. And you see this is a very beautiful graph because it shows that the United States, through trade and specialization, can consume more than what it can produce. So it can consume outside the production possibility frontier. And that's really not a trivial result. And likewise, Canada gets 2.5. It can also consume outside its PPF, 2.5. 2.5, but they need to trade. So the question is, how many units? So obviously the Canadians would have to export buns, and if the Canadians agree to consume only 2.5 units of hot dogs, that means they need 2.5 buns, but they produce 6. So under trade, Canada will export 3.5 bonds to the USA. So that leaves 6 minus 3.5, that's 2.5, that leaves 2.5 bonds with Canada. The United States produces 1 bond and gets 3.5, so that allows for the consumption of 4.5 bonds. So Canada will export 3.5 bonds to the United States, and of course that is equivalent to saying that the United States imports 3.5 bonds from Canada. And what about the United States? The United States produces 7 links. The Canadians don't produce any links, but if they can consume 2.5 links, it's obvious that the United States will export 2.5 links, 2.5 links or brats or sausages to Canada. And if the United States exports 2.5 links, they produce 7. 7 minus 2.5, that leaves the United States still with 4.5. And therefore they can consume 4.5 hot dogs and Canada 2.5. But this graph, to an economist, it's very beautiful because it shows that trade is a positive sum game in the sense that each country can consume more than what it individually can produce. So it is a positive sum game, not a negative sum game. So if we compare that again, and maybe that's already some heads up for what we will talk about later, we said, we compared trade to mercantilism. And the mercantilists, they held that trade is a zero-sum game. So now we measure a country's wealth often in terms of GDP. And GDP, and we will talk about that more in the next topic, is defined as all the consumption that we have, plus there are a couple of other things like what the government spends, but this is also consumption if you want to, and what we invest. Investment is part of income. If you live in a country that invests a lot, that's good. Then we also generate income from exports. But then if we import something, that is reduced, or that is subtracted from GDP. So anyhow, the mercantilist world was focusing only on this part. And it basically said, look, if we export, yeah, that's good, but if we import, that's bad. So therefore we cannot grow richer, because how can we grow richer? Well, yeah, if exports minus imports are the same, yeah, well, we don't increase, holding everything else constant, ceteris paribus, our GDP, our income, our welfare. But the point is that, and that's the point that David Ricardo showed us, well, trade, even if this is equal to zero, what happens is that trade and specialization increases our consumption. So therefore it is not a zero-sum game as the mercantilists argued, but it is a positive sum game. Okay, so I hope that is a little bit clear. We'll talk about this formula more in the next topic when we talk about GDP, or the topic after the next topic. But anyhow, we will talk about it at some point. But the importance of the theory of comparative advantage is essentially that David Ricardo nullified beliefs that were considered to be true for almost 200 years in a simple model. And the power of this theory ultimately convinced everyone in England that one should get rid again of the Corn Laws. And this is what happened in England at some point of time, but it was already, I believe, after the death of David Ricardo. But there is no doubt that this theory has had tremendous political influence on England in the 19th century. And ultimately, you could argue that the theory of comparative advantage helped England to maintain its advantage as an industrial powerhouse for many, many years, all the way up today. And it was a theory that ultimately overthrew the political dominance and the economic dominance of the landed aristocracy. So today, not many people work anymore in agriculture in England. Those times are over. England is a very powerful, industrialized economy and an industrialized nation. And if you compare that, for example, to other countries today, like Latin American countries, like in the midst of the 19th century, countries like Argentina and Brazil, they were among the richest in the world. But all the welfare and all the wealth that those countries accumulated accrued to the landed aristocracy. Many countries in Latin America, they never had a powerful figure like David Ricardo that would have said, look, we need to promote the industrial revolution by increasing trade. What many countries in Latin America did when they realized that the United States and Europe are becoming more and more industrialized and that Latin American countries fall behind, what many Latin American countries did, they thought, well, we should not try to compete, we should not try to trade more, but we should impose tariffs. And, if you want to see one of the reasons why many Latin American countries are not as industrialized as many countries in Europe or in the United States or Canada, the reason is that they have been protecting the landed aristocracy for a much longer time than other countries. But that's just a note on the side. What's really important is that you can see the theory and again what kind of interpretations you do with it. That's normative economics, what we talked about earlier. But if you take a look at this model, I think we can all agree that trade is a positive sum game. And that would be the positive theory. What we do out of it, whether you think trade is good or bad, that's your choice. But that's the theory. So we'll still review it a little bit in the problem set, but I hope everything is clear. And of course, I also hope that you actually enjoyed it and found it interesting.